there was some degree of runaway expectations. I think there was also some degree that they weren't extremely forthcoming with the state of the game.
The Cyberpunk 2077's story is very much kind of a story of everything that can and will go wrong in game development.
What is this bug?
Jackie's AI flipped out. It wasn't there before.
Where's my gun?
Keep her steady.
I can't shoot.
The release of Cyberpunk 2077 in December of 2020 will go down as one of the most disastrous game launches in history, and it instantly rewrote the narrative of its celebrated developer, CD Projekt Red.
Larger studios with bigger budgets weren't able to create the same quality of open-world game.
The inside story of the making of Cyberpunk depicts a process marred by unchecked ambition, unrealistic timelines, and a focus on marketing at the expense of development.
When CD Projekt stock was at its high, it was the largest stock in the Polish stock market.
Cyberpunk was supposed to be the biggest game of 2020. This was a game that was starring Keanu Reeves. This was a game that was from the makers of The Witcher 3. This was supposed to be the big tentpole release of last year. And for it to become such a disaster for so many people, I think will have pretty far-reaching consequences.
CD Projekt's origins are somewhat unique in the games industry. In the West and Japan, the late 80s and 90s were dominated by games for the home console market, and characters like Mario and Sonic the Hedgehog were becoming household names. The same was not true in a post-Soviet and economically depressed Poland. Most gaming was done on PCs, and most games were copied and sold in small markets around the country.
You could go to the market down the street in Warsaw and buy and sell CDs. And these two guys, Marcin Nowinski and Michał Kaczynski, decided they were going to start selling CDs, and they wound up striking a deal with the people who made a game called Baldur's Gate, which was kind of like the seminal role-playing game in the late 90s.
It was never a business, it was kind of lifestyle, so we're actually pretty bad with counting money.
So you can kind of think of it almost like Nike, where Phil Knight was selling shoes out of the trunk of his car. You can kind of think about it the same way. It was, just selling physical goods and then evolving that into a much broader enterprise.
CD Projekt, named for selling CDs, would move on from just reselling games to localizing Western and Japanese-made games into the Polish language. But it wasn't until 2002 that the company would make its own game, The Witcher.
The Witcher is a huge series, huge fantasy series in Poland, and so it was a pretty big deal that these guys got the rights to make the video games.
The Witcher book series is a source of national pride in Poland, and as CD Projekt released The Witcher 2, the video game series would become an important economic symbol for Poland as well.
CD Projekt Red had become this behemoth of an institution in Poland, and they were really big in the Polish technology scene because they were getting more worldwide attention than most Polish companies do, and making a lot of money. And in 2011, when Barack Obama came to visit Poland, the Prime Minister actually gave him a copy of The Witcher 2.
I confess I'm not very good at video games, but I've been told that it is a great example of Poland's place in the new global economy.
But it would be the launch of The Witcher 3 in 2015 that would elevate CD Projekt Red from representing the best of Poland to representing the best of the games industry.
I mean, really, the thing people look for first and foremost, I think, is that the game is just good, and Witcher 3 was just a phenomenal game. There's a level of just storytelling, an emphasis on making every side quest count, on top of the atmosphere, the dialogue, the character interactions, the different ways stories can end. They nail that.
Other open-world games felt empty and forced, and the developers of them gave excuses as to why there couldn't be more rich story or interactions. And The Witcher 3 blew them out of the water. CD Projekt Red was beloved. They were seen as a studio that was willing to make what the player wanted and to truly put in the love and effort required to make a high-quality game that really connects with the people playing with it.
And the winner for Game of the Year 2015 is The Witcher 3.
The Witcher 3 would go on to win over 250 Game of the Year awards, but along with being a critical success, for CD Projekt, it was also a financial success. Estimates put the sales of Witcher 3 at around 28 million copies in 2019. A huge step up considering by 2014, The Witcher and The Witcher 2 had only combined to sell 8 million copies. And with 2 large expansions for The Witcher 3, CD Projekt also helped separate themselves from other AAA publishers at the time.
And the game award goes to, oh man, I have to pay a microtransaction to unlock. That's so stupid that this has to, hold on, I got this, guys, here we go.
Other games, and the most notorious, one to do this was EA's Star Wars Battlefront 2. They got really aggressive on microtransactions in a game that already cost at least $60. You could have paid more if you bought the premium editions. But not only was it that they were being very aggressive and trying to get you to spend money, but you could actually get items that helped you win. Well, gamers kind of draw the line in the sand there, and they don't like that.
CD Projekt had done this phenomenal job of marketing themselves as a gamer-friendly company.
We've said this a million times, and I'll say it again. We're gamers, first of all, and we all like to be treated fairly. So it only makes sense that as developers, we apply the same principle to everything we do here at CD Projekt Red. So giving everyone a bunch of free DLC was an absolutely no-brainer.
They said, we're not going to sell you DLC that's like horse armor packs and other nonsense. We're going to just give you free stuff, and then we're going to sell big expansions as part of The Witcher 3.
And not only were they really good, they were offered at a fair price.
And this was a company that was seen as just like a company that really cared about quality and cared about its customers and would not do anything to kind of screw fans over the way that fans see that EA and Activision and all the other big publishers do.
With a critically and financially successful game, as well as the goodwill from the gaming audience, all the focus would shift to CD Projekt's next release, Cyberpunk 2077.
It's actually funny. They first announced it through like a press release, and then they showed off a trailer at the beginning of 2013 that was like the CGI trailer of like a woman, and there was all sorts of cool cyberpunk stuff, flying cars, lots of stuff. But it wasn't really until after The Witcher 3 that Cyberpunk began really like building up this feverish level of hype.
CD Projekt Red, though, wouldn't put out another trailer for Cyberpunk until 2018 at the E3 trade show.
And they showed off it was like a 2-minute trailer of Cyberpunk. Looked pretty rad. And then they showed behind the scenes for E3 attendees, for press and anyone else who could get score an appointment in there. They showed this 45-minute demo, and it blew people away.
Welcome to the gameplay demo walkthrough of CD Projekt Red's upcoming title, Cyberpunk 2077. The gameplay you're about to see is from a work-in-progress version of the game. Everything you see is potentially subject to change.
Holy this, if they can live up to what they showed me, it's game over.
It all looked incredibly impressive. They had enough action, enough narrative beats with just the right amount of tension. They touted how each of these NPCs, there are thousands of them, each one with their own daily routines and everything.
We've greatly enhanced our crowd and community systems to create the most believable city in any open-world game to date.
So people were certainly blown away by this demo. It won E3 awards, and just people left the theater just in awe. What they didn't know, of course, is that the demo was completely fake.
Fake demos are common at E3. Studios put together builds of games to show off what they intend the game to be like, rather than the actual state of the game. What was unique about this demo was that it was impressively long.
It kind of plays into this idea that CD Projekt is very much a marketing-driven company, and so demos were really, really important to them. So it was really important that they make this demo blow people away, which it did. But that might have come at the cost of like some time they could have been spending on the game.
A year later, at E3 2019, fans would get another big surprise.
Whoa! No way! Oh, what? Please welcome Keanu Reeves.
The feeling of being there, of walking the streets of the future, is really going to be breathtaking. You're breathtaking! You're breathtaking!
The Cyberpunk trailers showed gorgeous cities, beautiful lighting, really cutting-edge technology when it comes to the rendering of the game itself. People were very excited to be immersed in this gorgeous cyberpunk world. They saw over 8 million pre-orders, which is a ridiculously large amount for any title to sell, let alone pre-sell.
And you saw the stock price start to go up and up and up and to the right, you know, pretty much in a straight line. If you just look at like the Polish stock market, like the WIG index, when CD Projekt stock was at its high, it was the largest stock in the index.
And that was around the time that they announced that the game would be coming in April of 2020. Behind the scenes, people were pretty shocked that they were saying April. I don't think a single person who worked on that game actually thought they had a chance of coming out in April of 2020. So in April of 2019, I published an article for Kotaku about the making of a game called Anthem, which was a game from BioWare that was disastrous in many ways, and the article kind of ran through why that was. And afterwards, I started hearing from other developers who had stories to share that they said sounded a whole lot like Anthem's. The deadline is unrealistic, the direction keeps changing, things are floundering, we're going through a lot of problems. This sounds exactly like what you wrote about Anthem. Around that same time, perhaps coincidentally, I heard from the CEO of CD Projekt Red who wanted to reach out to me specifically to talk about crunch.
CD Projekt Red had a reputation for crunch, especially during the development of Witcher 3.
Their management wanted them to have a reputation for treating workers well and not forcing them to go through crunch. So Marcin Nowinski, who's the co-founder and co-CEO of CD Projekt Red, came to me and said, hey, I want to make a vow right now that we're not going to force anybody to crunch, that people will not have to work mandatory overtime on this project.
Over the course of reporting, Bloomberg has conducted interviews with more than 20 current and former CD Projekt staff, most of whom requested anonymity so as not to risk their careers. CD Projekt declined to comment on the process or provide interviews for this story. The company would end up delaying the game 3 different times, first pushing from an April 2020 release to September, then November, and once again to December 2020. In order to meet the deadline, the studio would scale down the size of Cyberpunk's main city, as well as canceling some features. And while those measures helped, developers still said they were under significant crunch, including one former audio programmer who claimed to work up to 13 hours a day, 5 days a week, and stating he had seen friends who had lost their families over this.
This was not a big secret in the office that the game was not going to be ready, but a similar sort of thing happened with The Witcher 3, and a similar sort of thing happens with a lot of games where they don't seem ready until suddenly everything just clicks. Some of the best games ever made, were created through this process. I don't know that it's the most efficient or the wisest way to make video games, but it's what a lot of people do. I think that management there has genuinely tried to change it, or at least said they wanted to change it, but it has proven very difficult to change that when you make games in this one specific way.
Game studios, some of them see crunch as part of their core culture, that all of their games that they've made under crunch have been successful, so it must be a core element to the magic recipe for creating good games. And that's really not the case. We've run studies and seen that at 8 weeks of working 60 hours plus, the output of a professional is the same as if they were working 40 hours a week. So chronic overwork degrades how effective someone is to the point where then it becomes negative, and overworking them is just getting you less and less productivity.
And so these guys, the people at CD Projekt, having made The Witcher 3, were kind of riding on that high. You could call it arrogance or confidence or whatever you want to call it, of having made The Witcher 3. And I think that, like, having a certain level of confidence can certainly be a good thing, but in this case it could also be dangerous because it kind of blinded them to the reality, which was that this game wasn't going to coalesce.
Cyberpunk was an ambitious project by any standard, but for CD Projekt Red, it was also a very large departure from The Witcher. Cyberpunk was a sci-fi world rather than a medieval fantasy. Instead of a third-person game that revolved around combat with swords and shields, Cyberpunk was a first-person shooter. Making Cyberpunk would require CD Projekt to invest in new technology, including its game engine.
Games have to have a lot of logic behind them. When someone talks about developing a game, particularly in their own engine, they're not just talking about creating art assets and setting up quests. They're talking about building the rendering systems, figuring out the shaders and graphic systems and physics systems. It's a lot of low-level work, and a lot of that low-level work prevents some testing and progressing of the game forward.
Which is sort of like if you were driving a train while someone else was in front of you, like laying down tracks as you went. Or like trying to make a movie while someone else is building the camera at the same time. It's very, very difficult and makes things go super slowly and makes things go very inefficiently and just hampers everything.
And that's actually why game development studios prefer open offices. It's so that the team can see what everyone else is working on and have a passive sense of the state of the game and how it's going.
But in the final months of development, developers in Cyberpunk were mostly doing this development from their homes.
Across Poland, all malls, restaurants, clubs, and bars closing down, with a ban on gatherings of more than 50 people.
I think because of COVID, there was a lot of issues, not just in terms of development and the timing, but also the communication side of it. And QA is a huge part, quality assurance is a huge part of game development that a lot of people don't talk about.
QA testers help run the game through its paces to figure out any issues it may have. Then they write report tickets and send it back to developers to fix. It's easy to underestimate the amount of time it'll take to fix a few bugs that you find. There's a little song that I appreciate. There's 99 little bugs on the wall, 99 little bugs. Take one down, patch it around, 117 bugs in the code.
Making that even more difficult was just how many different platforms the game was coming out for. Due to the delays, the game was simultaneously coming out for PCs and Google's new streaming service Stadia, as well as the console systems that would now include the next generation PS5 and Xbox Series X, as well as the previous generation of consoles, the PS4 and Xbox One. And while the hardware in these systems were in some cases 7 years old, they represented a large market of console gamers, particularly in the West.
That is really, really complicated, and porting and dealing with like optimization across the platforms can be really, really challenging. And when you are a company, as CD Projekt Red is, that primarily develops on PCs and is used to making games for PCs, sometimes not everybody in the studio will be like even bothering playing the console versions, as is what happened here. And what we saw with Cyberpunk was a case where the console versions, the last gen console versions, were just a complete mess.
And when management announced in October that the game had gone gold, meaning it was ready to be pressed into discs, there were still major bugs being discovered. Exhausted programmers would scramble to fix as many of these problems as they could via a day one patch. And CD Projekt did their best to control which versions of the game would be seen before the release date.
So with a video game review process, you are sent, first, some guidelines. Here's what to reveal and what not to reveal when the game launches, what spoilers are important and what aren't. And they give you these guidelines alongside an NDA or some kind of embargo. When I read through the embargo and the restrictions, I realized just how restrictive it was.
So reviews came out a few days before the game came out, and they seemed pretty good. But reviewers all cautioned that they said, hey, CD Projekt only let us have the PC version. They didn't let us have access to the PS4 and Xbox One versions of the game. The thinking at CD Projekt was maybe, okay, we have a patch plan that maybe reviewers didn't have access to, like a day one patch, so we don't want them to show footage of the game before it's ready to go. And maybe they thought, hey, the console versions, they're going to get a patch like the day before it comes out, so we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to show those versions just yet. But no matter what the rationale was behind CD Projekt doing this, ultimately it turned into the true scope of the game's problems being hidden.
On December 10th of 2020, the game was released, and it didn't take long for the problems to become public.
Oh, now it works. He f***ing T-post. Stop T.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the T-posing stuff can be kind of funny, but when it keeps happening, it really starts to break your immersion. My car would spawn where another car was already at, and so they would like collide, and then both cars would explode or something.
There are a lot of like people's quests ending unexpectedly, or like AIs appearing. One common one was that someone who was supposed to be just like with you on one mission, like a buddy with you on one mission, would just follow you for the entire game, and just inexplicably they would just be around with you. One hilarious bug that I discovered when I first loaded up the game on launch day was there were tiny trees covering every single thing in the game. I was playing through the prologue, and there were just little trees everywhere.
I did try Cyberpunk 2077 on PlayStation 4, and for me, it's as good as unplayable with that level of performance. There are segments where it runs at like 25 to 30 frames, but then there are segments where it's clear the frame rates are at like your 15s and 20s. And aiming with an analog stick while frame rates are rising and dipping, it's simply impossible.
The experience on those last-gen consoles would be so bad that Sony would take the unprecedented action of removing the game from its digital stores.
I mean, the stock started selling off little by little, and then a lot by a lot. It kind of cascaded to a point, and then once we saw Sony turn off the ability to buy the game and offer refunds, that was kind of the drop that the bottom fell out.
Yeah, so about a few weeks after the game came out, the CD Projekt's co-founder and co-CEO Marcin Nowinski came on a video, and he spoke for about 5 minutes and tried to address point by point like some of the things that people have been talking about.
Please don't fault any of our teams for what happened. They all are incredibly talented and hardworking. Myself and the board are the final decision makers, and it was our call to release the game.
It was just kind of justifying their actions and apologizing and vowing that they would fix this game, and they wanted to regain people's trust, etc., etc.
CD Projekt Red would release 3 hotfixes in December, and 2 more patches in the coming months. In their apology video, CD Projekt Red would also release a roadmap for their future plans, for both their DLC content and future patches. Although exactly when these things would come was a little vague.
It's to be seen what they do. I mean, I think to save face, they have to do what they can to fix Cyberpunk, but how much resources they dedicate to premium DLC expansions, to the online mode, is still kind of up in the air. We have to see what they say about that. Or do you kind of just do what you can, stop the bleeding, and just move on to Witcher 4? At what point do you have to just say, we're going to nip this in the bud and move on, is going to be a lot of focus for a lot of investors in the next few months.
There's a lot of precedent in the video game industry for redemption stories, for video games coming out in a pretty bad shape and then getting fixed, patched, updated. added to over time. We've seen it with No Man's Sky, we've seen it with Destiny, we've seen it with Final Fantasy XIV, a lot of these online games. One thing that they could do is say anyone who bought the game will get like the DLC for free as an apology from us. There are a lot of things they could do, I think, to win back the fans.
I think it's apparent looking at the release of Cyberpunk 2077 and the reception of it that gamers overall are much more tolerant about pushed back release deadlines and understand that a game that is rushed or built under crunch is less likely to come out in the state that they would like it to.
I make videos about these companies, and it's not because I want them to fail, it's because I want them to get better. I hope CD Projekt looks at everything that's happening and just actually makes some changes.
I'm going to quote Shigeru Miyamoto from Nintendo. He's like the father of Super Mario. A delayed game is eventually good. A rushed game is never good. And this is a company that was not lacking for money. They had plenty of cash. And so the decision to not do so will go down in history as a very poor one.